The war began long before humanity even knew it was part of the game. The Galactic Dominion, an alliance of countless alien species, had long established its dominion over the known universe. They saw themselves as the rightful rulers, the caretakers of all sentient life. And humanity? They were nothing more than a primitive, inconsequential species clinging to a tiny blue rock. The elders of the Dominion had spoken many times of humans, those fragile, short-lived creatures who had only recently discovered space travel. They warned their people to leave Earth alone, to let the humans remain in their isolated corner of the galaxy. They are reckless, the elders had said. They are dangerous. Their emotions drive them more than logic. If they ever learn of the greater universe, they will not bow to our rule. They will fight. The younger leaders scoffed at the warnings. What could a species as young and weak as humanity possibly do? Their military was a joke. Their bodies were frail compared to the armored scales of the Krall, or the 4 arms of the Yundari, or the psionic minds of the Vial. Humanity was nothing, so they ignored the elders' warnings. They invaded. At first, it was easy. Earth's defenses crumbled before the might of the Dominion's warships. Major cities were turned to rubble in hours. Governments fell. Humanity's resistance was laughable. For a time, it seemed like the Dominion had been right to dismiss the elders' warnings. The war was nearly over before it had even begun. The Dominion had won. Or so they thought. But they didn't understand humanity. They didn't understand what centuries of war, struggle, and survival had done to this species. Because for humanity, war wasn't just strategy. It wasn't just technology. It was personal. And humanity had never lost a war without making the enemy bleed for every inch of ground. The first mistake the Dominion made was assuming humanity would surrender. The second mistake was underestimating just how far humans would go when pushed into a corner. The resistance began in the ruins, scattered, disorganized at first, but ruthless. The Dominion called it terrorism. Humanity called it survival. They adapted. Fast. Dominion soldiers, used to fighting predictable battles with structured tactics, found themselves facing an enemy that played by no rules. They poisoned supply lines, turned entire cities into traps, lured Dominion forces into abandoned buildings, and set explosives that tore war machines apart. The Dominion responded by sending more troops, heavier firepower, more brutal measures. That was their third mistake, because now humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for revenge. The captured Dominion soldiers learned firsthand what it meant to be on the other side of an unrelenting, desperate enemy. They weren't just executed, they were studied. Their weapons, their armor, their tactics. Humanity learned. And then they improved. It was slow at first. But then something terrifying happened. The scattered human forces started coordinating. Their attacks became more precise. They started using Dominion weapons against them, turning their own technology into instruments of destruction. And then the Dominion realized too late. The elders had been right. Because when humanity fights a war, they don't just fight to win, they fight to dominate. They fight until their enemies are nothing but ash. They fight until the battlefield belongs to them. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. Humanity didn't just push the Dominion off Earth. They followed them into space, and they didn't stop. Not until every Dominion world burned. Not until humanity ruled the battlefield. The first Dominion world to fall was Jundar Prime. It was their central military outpost, a fortress world protected by planetary shields, orbital defense grids, and millions of troops. The Dominion believed it was impenetrable. They were wrong. The humans had learned. They had studied every tactic, every weakness, and most importantly, they had adapted. They didn't launch a full-scale invasion like the Dominion expected. They didn't announce their arrival. They didn't send diplomats. Instead, they infiltrated. At first, no one even realized they were there. Dominion supply chains started failing. Communications were disrupted. Key officers went missing, only to be found days later with their throats slit or their bodies riddled with bullets from stolen Dominion weapons. And then, the real attack began. It started with the sky. The orbital defense grid, once thought unbreachable, flickered and failed. No one knew how. Later, it was discovered that human infiltrators had sabotaged the power relays from within, using knowledge they had gathered from captured soldiers. Then came the drop pods. The Dominion had never seen humans use this tactic before. Thousands of pods, each carrying a single soldier, rained down like a meteor storm. The ground forces barely had time to react before heavily armed humans burst out, tearing through defenses with brutal efficiency. Jundar Prime turned into a nightmare. Dominion soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves in an urban hellscape of collapsing buildings, ambushes, and relentless human fighters who refused to die easily. The Dominion's leaders panicked. They had always believed their superior numbers and technology made them untouchable. But now they were facing an enemy that fought like a cornered animal. Except this animal was intelligent, coordinated, and utterly ruthless. When the last Dominion general on Jundar Prime tried to surrender, he was met with cold, human eyes. "No peace," the human commander said. "Not after Earth." And then the executions began. The Dominion, for all their arrogance, had never been subjected to total war before. They had never faced an enemy that didn't just want victory, but vengeance. They had thought humanity was weak. Now they understood. But it was too late. The fall of Jundar Prime was only the beginning. Within months, humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were on the offensive. Their captured Dominion ships were refitted with human ingenuity, turning them into weapons even deadlier than before. The tactics evolved. Now humanity was striking faster than the Dominion could react, hitting key targets, dismantling their command structure piece by piece. The Dominion started losing, not just battles, entire planets. Some alien species, realizing the inevitable, abandoned the Dominion, choosing neutrality over extinction. Others tried to fight to the last, believing they could outlast humanity's wrath. They were wrong. Because once the fire of war had been lit in humanity's heart, it would not be extinguished. And so the great empire that had ruled for centuries collapsed. And from its ruins, only one name remained: humanity. The Dominion's High Council sat in stunned silence. These were the rulers of a galactic empire that had lasted for millennia, their word once law across hundreds of star systems. They had commanded fleets so vast that entire worlds trembled at the mere sight of them, and now they were afraid. Not of another mighty empire, not of a species with overwhelming numbers or devastating technology. They were afraid of the humans. "What do they want?" one council member whispered, his voice shaking. "Revenge," another replied grimly. It was no longer a war. It was a reckoning. Humanity was not negotiating. They did not accept surrenders. They did not conquer in the traditional sense. They burned. They erased. Every Dominion world they touched became another graveyard. The worst part? They learned. They didn't just win battles. They adapted after each one, becoming deadlier, more efficient, more unpredictable. Their tactics, at first a chaotic mess of guerrilla warfare and stolen technology, had now transformed into something far worse. Precision. They struck exactly where it hurt the most: logistics, leadership, key infrastructure. They knew which planets controlled fuel supplies, which stations coordinated fleets, which leaders were irreplaceable. And they removed them. The Council had ignored the Elders' warnings. They had dismissed the stories of humanity's past wars. their history of relentless conflict. Now they understood, and they were powerless to stop it. On the bridge of the Dominion's last great warship, High Admiral Xeric stood in silence, staring at the tactical display. His fleet, once the pride of the Dominion, was crumbling. The humans had surrounded them. A force 1/3 the size of his own had outmaneuvered him, forcing his ships into a corner of dead space where they had no escape. He had underestimated them, like so many others before him. The transmission from the enemy fleet crackled through his command deck. A human voice spoke, calm and composed. "Surrender, and we will make it quick." Xeric's tendrils tightened in rage. Surrender? To a species that had once been nothing but an afterthought? Impossible. He opened the fleet-wide comms channel. "We fight to the last ship," he ordered. His officers obeyed. But deep down, they all knew the truth. This was the end. The humans struck. Their ships, smaller and faster, wove through the Dominion's formations like predators picking off wounded prey. Precision strikes crippled engines, destroyed weapons systems, and shattered morale. Within minutes, the battle was over. Admiral Xeric sat in his chair as the ship around him burned. His last thoughts were not of victory or honor, only regret. They should have listened to the elders. Humanity did not stop with the Dominion's defeat. The galaxy watched in horror as the once mighty empire was wiped from existence. Some species begged for peace, others tried to resist. It did not matter. By the time humanity was done, the galaxy was no longer ruled by an alliance of alien civilizations. It belonged to one species alone. The new rulers of the battlefield. Humanity. The galaxy lay in ruins, and humanity stood at its center. Once the Dominion had controlled thousands of worlds, its fleets spanning across the stars like an unbreakable net. Now, those same worlds burned. Those same fleets had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The mighty empire that had once looked down on Earth as an insignificant rock had been shattered, its leaders hunted down, its armies slaughtered without mercy. There was no negotiation, no treaties, no rebuilding. The Dominion had tried to enslave humanity, to crush it before it could become a threat. They had underestimated what happens when humans are pushed to the brink. Now there was no more Dominion. Only humanity remained. The survivors, the species who had once been part of the Dominion but had either surrendered or managed to hide from humanity's wrath, gathered in secret. They met on a cold, barren moon in the far reaches of space, far from the destruction, far from the burning husks of former Dominion worlds. Representatives from a dozen species sat at a long, circular table, their faces grim. "We cannot let this continue," croaked an elder of the Vile, his voice trembling. His people had once ruled the Dominion's psychic warfare divisions. Now they were fugitives, hunted like animals. "They do not conquer," hissed a Crawl warlord, his voice laced with barely contained rage. "They do not occupy. They destroy. Entire planets gone. There is no diplomacy with them." The gathered leaders looked to the far side of the room, where a single shadowed figure stood. Unlike the others, this figure was not alien. It was human, a traitor to their own kind. "You have fought them," the Vile elder said, his pale, translucent hands trembling. "You know what they are capable of. Tell us. How do we stop them?" The human stepped forward, pulling down the hood of their cloak. Their face was marked with scars, their eyes dark with something the others couldn't quite place. "You don't," the human said simply. The room fell into stunned silence. "They are beyond stopping," the human continued. "You don't understand what you are facing. This is not an empire that wants control. This is not a species that will ever settle for peace." The Vile elder's eyes widened. "Then what do they want?" The human took a slow breath, staring down at the table. "They want revenge." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Kral warlord slammed a fist against the table. "Then we fight! We bring together the last remaining fleets! We make our stand before they wipe us all out!" The human chuckled softly. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of someone who had already seen the inevitable. "You don't get it," the human said, shaking their head. "You think this is a war." They looked up, and their eyes, those dark, human eyes, pierced into every soul in the room. "This isn't a war anymore," the human said. "This is extinction." Across the galaxy, humanity continued its march. There were no grand speeches, no declarations of conquest. There was only action. One by one, the remaining Dominion planets vanished, wiped clean of life. Any species that dared resist was annihilated. Some fled. Entire fleets abandoned their homeworlds and vanished into the unknown, hoping to find refuge in the unexplored reaches of the universe. It did not matter. Humanity was patient. Humanity did not forget. And one by one, the stars fell silent. On the ruined remains of Earth, where the first battle had begun, the last surviving elder of the Dominion was brought before a council of human warlords. His body was broken, his once proud robes tattered. He had lived long enough to see his empire fall, to see his people erased from existence. A human general stepped forward, looking down at him with cold, emotionless eyes. The elder coughed, struggling to lift his head. His voice was weak, but he managed to whisper, "Why?" The human tilted his head. "Why?" he repeated. The elder's breathing was ragged. We surrender. Your revenge is complete. The Dominion is no more." His tired eyes met the human's gaze. "Why do you continue?" For a long moment the human said nothing. Then, finally, he knelt down, staring the elder in the eye. "You should have listened," the human said softly. And then he pulled the trigger. The elder's body slumped to the ground. The war was over. The galaxy belonged to humanity. And no one was left to challenge them. There was no cheering, no grand celebration. Humanity had won. The Dominion was gone. Their fleets, their armies, their leaders, all erased. The worlds they once ruled were silent now, nothing more than drifting husks of destruction. And yet, there was no joy in victory. Earth was a graveyard. What had started as a war for survival had become something else, something darker. At first, humanity had fought to ensure they would never be victims again. But at some point, that had changed. Revenge had consumed them, and now they were alone. The last Dominion world had fallen months ago. The final remnants of the once mighty empire had fled into the void, their ships disappearing into uncharted space. Some of humanity's commanders wanted to hunt them down, to finish what had been started. But others hesitated. Because, for the first time, they asked themselves the question no one had dared to voice. What happens now? Aboard the warship Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova stood at the command deck, staring at the map of the galaxy. It looked different now. Entire sectors, once teeming with life, had gone dark. What had once been battlefields were now wastelands. And humanity? Humanity had no more enemies left to fight. "Any word from the High Command?" one of her officers asked. She shook her head. "Number they're still deciding." The officer frowned. "Deciding what?" Sarah sighed. "What to do with the galaxy?" For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with an iron grip. They had controlled trade, set laws, dictated who thrived and who suffered. Now, all of that was gone. There were still independent species, neutral civilizations that had managed to avoid the war. They were watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Would they rebuild? Would they take the Dominion's place and rule as conquerors? Or would they keep going? Would they turn their weapons on anyone who might one day challenge them? Sarah didn't know the answer, and that terrified her. On the barren world of Roth 7, a small colony of survivors huddled in the ruins of an old Dominion outpost. They were not soldiers. They were not leaders. They were simply those who had managed to escape the war. Refugees. One of them, a young Vale named Yirak, stood watch at the edge of the settlement. His people had once been proud, their empire stretching across dozens of systems. Now they were little more than scattered ghosts, hiding from the monsters they had created. From the humans. His hands trembled as he spotted movement on the horizon. A ship, descending through the thick clouds of smoke that still clung to the planet's surface. It was human. Panic spread through the camp. Some ran for weapons, others for shelter. "They've found us," one of the elders whispered. Yirak felt his heart pound in his chest. This was it. The end. The ship landed. The hatch opened. And then, nothing. No soldiers. No attack. Just a single crate dropped onto the ground outside the ship. Then, without a word, the ship lifted off and disappeared into the sky. Slowly, cautiously, Yirak approached the crate. He reached out, pried it open. Inside were food supplies, medical kits, blankets. For a long time he simply stared. Had the humans spared them? Were they offering mercy? Or was this something else? A warning? A message? We decide who lives now. Yirak clenched his fists. The Dominion had called humanity weak once. They had laughed at them, ignored the warnings of the elders, and now? Now the fate of the galaxy rested in the hands of its new masters. Humanity had become something far more terrifying than the Dominion ever was. Because they weren't just conquerors. They were survivors. And survivors did whatever it took to ensure they were never threatened again. The universe held its breath. For the first time in history, there was no dominant galactic empire, no ruling council, no web of alliances to balance power. The Dominion had been erased, their infrastructure, their laws, their entire legacy, swept away as if it had never existed. And humanity, the victors, stood at the center of it all. The remaining species watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the humans take the throne the Dominion had left behind? Would they establish themselves as the new rulers of the stars? Or had they become something else entirely? On Earth, what remained of humanity's leaders gathered in the underground city of New Bastion. The surface was still too dangerous, still scarred from the war that had nearly wiped them out. At the head of the War Council, General Adrian Voss sat in silence as the others argued around him. "We need to rebuild," one voice insisted. "We've won, but our worlds are in ruin. Earth is barely habitable. Our colonies are stretched thin. If we don't focus on recovery, we'll collapse under our own weight." Another general shook her head. "And what happens when the survivors of the Dominion regroup? What happens when the scattered remnants of their fleets decide to take revenge? We must strike first. Finish what we started." Voss sighed. He had heard these arguments before, over and over. Some wanted peace, others wanted security through domination. The problem was, they didn't know what they were anymore. The war had shaped them into something new, something dangerous. They had become predators, perfected by necessity, by suffering, by the relentless need to survive. And now, with no one left to fight, that instinct had nowhere to go. His thoughts were interrupted by an incoming transmission, a live broadcast sent across all human channels. It was from Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova's flagship. Voss frowned and tapped a command on his console, bringing the transmission to the central screen. The image flickered, and there she was, standing on the bridge of her warship, her expression cold, unreadable. I have made a decision, she said, her voice steady. Murmurs filled the council chamber. Who was she to declare a decision? But Voss knew better. Kova wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol. She had led humanity's fleets to victory, orchestrated the downfall of the Dominion's core worlds. If anyone had the right to decide the future, it was her. She continued. The war is over, but our enemies still exist, scattered, broken, hiding in the dark. We could leave them be. We could take what we've won and focus on rebuilding. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. But that is not what we do. Silence. The Dominion never offered us mercy. They saw us as insects, an infestation to be exterminated. If we allow them to escape, to grow in the shadows, they will return. Not in our generation, perhaps, but one day. And when they do, they will be stronger. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with something deep, something dangerous. I refuse to let that happen. Voss's stomach tightened. He already knew what she was about to say. We finish this. We do not let the past repeat itself. We erase the Dominion from history, from memory, from existence itself. Murmurs turned into protests. You're talking about genocide, one of the counselors said, horrified. No, Kova replied. I'm talking about survival. Another voice broke in. And when they're gone? What then? Who do we turn our weapons on next? Kova's expression darkened. You think I don't ask myself that question every day? But I know one thing. We will never be victims again. The transmission ended. The room was silent. And in that moment, Voss understood. This war had never been about victory. It had been about fear, and now fear was all they had left. Across the galaxy, the hunt began. Humanity did not settle into peace. They did not rebuild cities or plant flags on conquered worlds. They searched. They hunted. The survivors of the Dominion, the last remnants of a broken empire, were found one by one. No mercy was given. No terms were offered. Entire fleets vanished in the dead of space. Refugee ships were intercepted and destroyed. Hidden colonies were discovered and erased. It was a purge. It was systematic. It was terrifying, and the rest of the galaxy could only watch in horror as the new rulers of the stars completed their work. Because deep down, they knew the truth. The Dominion had ignored the Elders' warnings, and now humanity was the warning. There was no escape. From the icy moons of the Karsus cluster to the scorched wastelands of the Drachnos belt, humanity's fleets spread like an unstoppable tide, hunting down the last remnants of the Dominion. The galaxy had become a graveyard, the once mighty empire reduced to whispers, its survivors fleeing from shadow to shadow. But there were no shadows dark enough, no depths deep enough. Humanity found them all, and humanity erased them. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova watched the destruction unfold. The last Dominion holdout in the Ryvok system had fallen. The planet below was burning, its final defenders annihilated in a swift, brutal assault. The hunt was almost over. But even as victory drew closer, something unsettled her. Admiral, one of her officers called. Incoming distress signal. It's not from a Dominion source. Kova narrowed her eyes. Put it through. The holoscreen flickered, revealing a trembling, wide-eyed figure. An elder of the Zeleri, one of the neutral species that had never been part of the Dominion. Please, the elder begged. We mean you no harm. We have never raised a hand against humanity, but we are afraid. You must stop. The war is over. The Dominion is gone. There is no more threat. Kova remained silent, her expression unreadable. Are we next? The elder whispered. The question hung in the air like a blade. Kova ended the transmission without a word. For the first time in years, uncertainty crept into her mind. What were they becoming? Across the galaxy, the rumors spread. It was said that humanity no longer had enemies, only prey. It was said that even species who had remained neutral were now sending emissaries, desperate to prove their loyalty before the hunters turned their gaze upon them. It was said that there was no longer a council, no longer diplomacy, only the silent, looming presence of Earth's fleets, watching, waiting. On a dying world, deep in uncharted space, the last Dominion warlord knelt before a human officer. His body was thin, his face gaunt. His people had once been conquerors. Now they were nothing but dust. The human watched him with cold, calculating eyes. "You ran for a long time." The warlord coughed, blood staining his lips. "We should have listened," he whispered. The human nodded. "Yes." The warlord took a shaking breath. "Will you rebuild?" The human said nothing. The warlord laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "No, of course you won't. There's nothing left to build." The human raised his weapon. The warlord met his gaze. "Then what will you do?" The answer was quiet. "We will watch." A single shot rang out, and with it, the last piece of the old galaxy died. The war was over. There was no longer an enemy, no longer a dominion, no longer a battle to fight. Humanity had no rivals left, no equals. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Because once a species learns to become hunters, they do not stop. They only wait. The stars were silent. For the first time in history, the galaxy had no war, no conquerors, no empire rising to take the place of the fallen dominion. And yet, peace did not come. Because the ones who had won the war were not builders, they were not rulers, they were something else entirely. They were predators. And the galaxy knew it. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova stared out into the endless void. The war was over. The last Dominion forces had been wiped from existence, their legacy reduced to ash. But the silence that followed was deafening. She had expected to feel relief. She had expected to feel something. Instead, there was only emptiness. A soft chime broke her thoughts. "Admiral," a voice said, "the Council is requesting an update." Kova exhaled slowly. "Put them through." The holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a dozen shadowed figures, humanity's remaining leaders, those who had survived the war. One of them, Counselor Hayes, leaned forward. "Is it done?" Kova nodded. "The last Dominion holdout has been eliminated. There are no survivors." A heavy silence followed. Then another voice, colder than the void itself. "And what of the others?" Kova's hands tightened into fists. She knew what they meant. The neutral species. The ones who had stayed out of the war. The ones who had watched from the sidelines, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Now they trembled in fear. "We are being watched," she said carefully. "Every civilization that remains is holding its breath, waiting for our next move." Hayes exhaled. "And?" Kova hesitated. "We could rebuild," she said. "We could create something new, a future where humanity is not feared, but respected, where we do not have to be hunters forever." Another counselor scoffed. "That is a fantasy. We have spent too long in the dark, too long fighting. The galaxy will never see us as anything other than what we have become." "What we have become," Kova repeated, her voice sharp. "Or what we have chosen to be." No one answered. Then Hayes spoke again. "The decision has already been made." Kova's stomach turned. "The fleets will not stand down," he continued. "Humanity will not lower its weapons. We will watch, and we will ensure that no threat to us, real or potential, ever rises again." She had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud, set in stone, made it feel final. "The others fear us," she said softly. "Do we really intend to prove them right?" Hayes leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "They ignored their elders' warnings once. They ignored the threat we could become. Now, we are the warning." The transmission ended. Kova stood there for a long time. The war was over, but humanity's hunt had just begun. Across the galaxy, the message was clear. Humanity did not claim the throne the Dominion had left behind. They did not send diplomats. They did not issue decrees. They simply remained, watching, waiting. No civilization dared to expand. No world dared to rise. Every species knew that the moment they became a potential threat, humanity would be there, silent, unstoppable. And then, one by one, species began to vanish. Some called it paranoia. Some said they had simply gone into hiding, retreating into the deepest corners of space. But others knew the truth. The galaxy had never feared the Dominion, not like this, because the Dominion had wanted power. Humanity wanted nothing. Nothing, except the certainty that they would never be threatened again. The galaxy had never known true silence until now. For the first time in history, there were no wars, no rebellions, no rising empires. The stars were quiet, the remaining civilizations holding their breath, afraid to even whisper their ambitions into the void, because they knew humanity was listening, watching, waiting. Admiral Sarah Kova stood alone in the observation deck of the Iron Will, staring into the vast emptiness before her. The war was over, but there was no peace. Only fear. She had spent her life fighting, leading fleets into battle, hunting down the remnants of the Dominion until there was nothing left. And now, with every enemy gone, there was nowhere left to turn, nothing left to fight. Humanity had won. And in doing so, they had become something far worse than conquerors. They had become ghosts, a silent, invisible force that haunted the galaxy, ensuring that no one ever dared to challenge them again. But Kova had seen the reports. Entire species vanishing without a trace, worlds going dark, refugee ships setting course for deep space and never being heard from again. They said humanity wasn't responsible. But Kova knew better. This wasn't victory. This was extinction, drawn out over years, over decades, not by war, not by fire, but by the slow, creeping terror that humanity had left behind. No empire would ever rise again, because no one dared to try. In the depths of space, on a forgotten world where no one dared to tread, a small colony of survivors huddled in the shadows. They did not send transmissions. They did not leave their planet. They did not even speak the name of their oppressors. Because the warnings of the elders had come true, the Dominion had ignored the humans once. And now, there was nothing left but silence. Because when the galaxy finally understood what humanity had become, it was already too late. The hunt had never ended. And it never would. The void of space was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos about to unfold. Admiral Dorian Raines stood at the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching the tactical display flicker with the positions of enemy vessels. The Galactic Dominion had thought humanity was weak. They thought Earth was just another world to conquer, another species to subjugate. They were about to learn otherwise. The Dominion had been at war with the Terralis, a reptilian species with an empire spanning hundreds of systems, for centuries. It had been a slow, grinding conflict. Battles were fought over the same systems, back and forth, like an eternal game of cosmic chess. But when the Dominion turned its eyes toward Sul, demanding humanity's submission, They had made a fatal miscalculation. Humans did not submit. Humans adapted. Humans fought. The war had started with skirmishes, pirate attacks, ships disappearing near colony worlds. Then came the blockade on Mars. The Dominion thought it would be over quickly, but they hadn't counted on humanity's sheer, relentless will to survive. Now, Earth was answering in full force. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Nathan Solis from his station. "The Dominion fleet is holding steady in the Lagrange Point, defensive formation. Looks like they think they're ready for us." Admiral Rains smirked. "Then let's show them how wrong they are." The human fleet moved in like a storm. Sleek, dark warships, their hulls coated with adaptive camouflage, shifting to the darkness of space. Dominion sensors, tuned to detect energy signatures and movement, struggled to keep up. By the time they realized the attack had begun, it was already too late. The first wave was brutal. HSS Fury, HSS Nemesis, and HSS Warhammer led the charge. Kinetic rounds, traveling at relativistic speeds, punched through Dominion shields like wet paper. Plasma bursts lanced out, cutting through enemy formations. A Dominion cruiser exploded, its debris scattering into the void. They had never seen anything like it. Humanity's technology wasn't the most advanced in the galaxy. Their ships weren't the largest. But they were fast. They were unpredictable. And most importantly, they fought with the kind of brutal efficiency that the Dominion, accustomed to slow, drawn-out wars, had never encountered before. The Dominion flagship, Trelax Honor, sent out a desperate distress signal. Reinforcements were already en route, but the message was clear. They weren't going to last that long. Rains stood unmoving, his eyes locked onto the holographic display. "Bring the railguns online," he ordered. The Retribution's massive twin railguns powered up. The Dominion had seen energy weapons before. They had seen torpedoes. But they had never faced something like this. Humanity's railguns were devastatingly simple. Massive slugs accelerated to unimaginable speeds, tearing through enemy ships with raw kinetic force. The first shot fired. A Dominion battleship in the center of their formation took the hit straight through its core. A second later, it was gone, reduced to a field of expanding wreckage. Panic spread through the enemy fleet. Their formations broke apart. Dominion officers, trained in hierarchy and rigid tactics, were not prepared for an opponent who could read their movements and counter them with brutal, calculated aggression. "Admiral," Solis called again, his voice laced with disbelief. "They're retreating." Rains folded his arms, watching as the enemy fleet scattered. Some tried to run. Others simply surrendered, shutting down their weapons and broadcasting distress signals. A minute. That's all it had taken. "Let them run," Rains said coldly, "but make sure the message gets out. Earth is not to be trifled with." The battle was over. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Dominion's retreat sent shockwaves across the galactic front. Fleets that had once feared nothing now scrambled to reassess their strategies. The news spread like wildfire. Humanity wasn't just another minor species. They were something far worse, an enemy that didn't fight like the rest of the galaxy. They fought to win. On board the HSS Retribution, Admiral Dorian Rains stood before the massive holographic display in the war room. His officers gathered around. The battle had been a resounding success, but he knew this was only the beginning. Commander Nathan Solis was the first to break the silence. "They won't take this loss lightly. We humiliated them. Their honor demands retaliation." Rains nodded, his expression grim. "Exactly, and that's why we don't wait for them to hit back." He turned to Major Lillian Carter, the head of intelligence operations. "What do we know about their nearest command centers?" Carter, a hardened officer with years of Black Ops experience, tapped a few commands into her tablet. The display zoomed in on the star system Velka 9, a heavily fortified Dominion outpost. Velka 9 is their strongest forward base in this region. If they want to strike back, this is where they'll regroup. Then we hit them first, Rains said. We send a message loud and clear. Earth doesn't wait for the storm. We are the storm. A murmur of agreement rippled through the officers. This was how humanity fought. They didn't play defense. They took the fight to the enemy. Solus, still analyzing the data, frowned. Velka 9 isn't just a military outpost. Civilians live there. Dominion loyalists, sure, but also refugees and non-combatants. Rains exhaled slowly. The room grew silent. This was war, but humanity wasn't a race of conquerors. They didn't slaughter indiscriminately like the Dominion had when they raised colonies on the outer rim. We target only military assets, he said firmly. If we cripple their command structure, the civilians won't even be a factor. We do this clean. Carter nodded, but there was a glint of something else in her eyes. She had seen too many wars, knew too well that there was no such thing as a clean fight. The next few hours were a blur of planning and coordination. The fleet moved swiftly, navigating through slipstream corridors to arrive at Velka 9 undetected. The Dominion had barely begun regrouping when the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. It was an ambush unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. Stealth bombers bypassed defenses before their sensors even registered the attack. Railgun rounds ripped through supply stations, severing the Dominion's logistical backbone. Precision strikes disabled communications, cutting Velka 9 off from the rest of the fleet. By the time Dominion forces scrambled to respond, it was already over. The HSS Retribution hovered ominously over the shattered remnants of the station. A transmission request came through. The face of a Dominion admiral appeared on the screen, his reptilian features twisted in rage. "You dare strike us like cowards?" he snarled. "You hide in the dark, strike from the shadows. This is not war. This is dishonor." Rains leaned forward, his voice ice-cold. "You misunderstand us, Admiral. We don't care about honor. We care about winning." The transmission cut out. The Dominion knew now. Humanity was not just another species to be bullied and conquered. They were a predator, and the hunt had just begun. The aftermath of the battle left Velka 9 in ruins, its once proud Dominion stronghold reduced to little more than scattered wreckage. Fires still burned in the remnants of its command center, though there was little left to salvage. The Dominion had underestimated humanity again, and it had cost them dearly. Admiral Rains stood at the observation deck of the HSS Retribution, watching as salvage drones scoured the remains for anything useful. The battle had been swift, decisive, surgical as planned. But he knew it wouldn't be the last. Commander Nathan Solus approached, his expression unreadable. "The Dominion fleet isn't responding to distress calls from Velka 9. Either they're too afraid to face us, or they're planning something bigger." Rains folded his arms. "We've backed them into a corner. The next move will be desperation." Major Lillian Carter's voice cut through the bridge's comms. "Admiral, we just intercepted a transmission from deep within Dominion space." "Let's hear it." Carter's face appeared on the main screen, her features tight with concern. "The Dominion High Command just declared us a Category Omega threat. That's their highest classification, reserved for species deemed existential dangers." Silence filled the room. Everyone understood what that meant. Solus exhaled. "So, they're calling for total war." Carter nodded. "Every fleet, every soldier, every weapon they have. They'll throw everything at us." Rains wasn't surprised. He had anticipated this reaction. But hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. The Dominion had fought other wars before, but never against an enemy like humanity. They had never fought against an opponent who learned, who adapted, who fought not just with strength, but with ruthless, calculated aggression. "They think they can drown us in numbers," Rains said, turning back toward the void outside. "They don't realize that we don't fight like them. We don't play by their rules." Solus nodded, though there was a shadow of doubt in his expression. "Even so, Admiral, this isn't just a fleet anymore. This is the entire Dominion war machine. We're talking about hundreds of battle groups, millions of soldiers, weapons we haven't even seen before." "We'll fight smarter," Rains said simply, "and we'll fight harder." Carter tapped at her console. "That's not the worst part. Our spies have confirmed that the Dominion is reaching out to the other major empires. They're trying to rally the entire galactic community against us." That was the real problem. Humanity had just made its mark in the galaxy, and already they were being painted as a threat to every other species. If the Dominion succeeded in convincing the neutral factions to join their war, Earth wouldn't be facing a single empire. They would be facing the combined might of the galaxy. A lesser species might have surrendered, might have tried to negotiate, to find a diplomatic way out. But humans weren't wired that way. Rains turned to his officers, his voice carrying a quiet steel. "We send a message of our own." Solus arched an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "We show them why making an enemy of Earth is the last mistake they'll ever make." Across the fleet, the order went out. War preparations began. Humanity would not be crushed. Humanity would conquer. The Dominion wasted no time. Within days of the Velka 9 massacre, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Entire battle groups were being mobilized, fleets stretching for light years converging toward human-occupied space. The Dominion had called for total war, and the galaxy had answered. Admiral Rains stood in the command center of the HSS Retribution, staring at the vast network of enemy movements projected onto the holotable. Red dots swarmed like a plague, each one representing a fleet hell-bent on humanity's destruction. Commander Nathan Solus exhaled sharply beside him. "We're looking at a coalition of over 12 species. The Dominion pulled every favor they had. Even the Terralis, their sworn enemies, have agreed to a temporary alliance to wipe us out." Rains wasn't surprised. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had introduced fear into a galaxy that had long thought itself superior, and nothing united old enemies like fear. Major Carter's voice came through the tactical channel. "Sir, intelligence confirms the main fleet is massing near the Trion Expanse. If they push through, they'll reach our outer colonies within a week." Solus ran a hand through his hair. "We can't stop a force that large in open battle. Even with all our tech, all our tactics, they'll overwhelm us." Rains remained silent for a moment. Then he looked up. "We don't fight them in open battle." Solus frowned. "Then how?" "We bleed them," Rains said. "We don't let them bring the war to us. We take the war to them." A slow grin spread across Carter's face. "You're talking about hit and run." "Not just hit and run," Rains clarified. "Total disruption. We don't just attack them. We cripple them. We cut supply lines, sabotage their command networks, turn every planet between here and Earth into a death trap. They think they're marching toward victory, but by the time they get here, they'll be broken." Solus let out a low chuckle. "Guerrilla warfare, but on a galactic scale." Rains nodded. "It's what humans do best." The plan was set in motion immediately. Strike teams were deployed to enemy supply routes, planting sleeper agents and sabotage cells within key logistics hubs. Covert operations hit Dominion fuel depots, causing critical shortages before battles could even begin. Stealth fleets harassed the enemy's long-range scouts, making it impossible for them to get accurate intelligence. And then, the real attacks began. At Zeltrak Station, the Dominion's primary resupply point, human infiltrators disabled automated defenses minutes before an assault fleet arrived. Explosions ripped through the station's infrastructure, and before the enemy could even mount a counterattack, the humans were gone. At Bax 5, an industrial world supplying Dominion warships, a series of accidents triggered catastrophic chain reactions in their primary shipyards. Within hours, hundreds of vessels were reduced to burning husks. At Veloc Prime, one of the Dominion's key communications hubs, cyber warfare teams unleashed a digital plague that caused confusion and miscommunication among the coalition forces. Battle plans were scrambled, reinforcements were misrouted, and in some cases, Dominion ships fired on each other. The galaxy had never seen war waged like this. The Dominion, so used to drawn-out battles fought with honor and predictable tactics, found itself flailing against an invisible enemy. Humanity didn't fight with brute force. They fought with relentless ingenuity. And then came the real turning point. A Dominion dreadnought, the Vector, carrying a high-ranking war council, was en route to the front lines. It was a mobile fortress, supposedly untouchable. But the humans had other plans. A single stealth corvette, HSS Phantom, managed to slip past the Dominion escort. Aboard it were some of the most elite soldiers humanity had ever trained. They boarded the Vector, cutting through the ship's defenses like ghosts in the dark. Within an hour, the Dominion's War Council lay dead, their throats slit in their own war room. By the time the Dominion even realized what had happened, the HSS Phantom was long gone. Panic gripped the coalition. Leaders hesitated. Fleets stalled. For the first time, the war machine ground to a halt, not because of superior firepower, but because the enemy had shattered their confidence. Solus stood beside Rains as they watched the latest battle reports. "They don't know what to do," he said with a grin. "They're used to fighting armies. They don't know how to fight an idea." Rains smirked. "That's because they don't understand what they're up against." Solus folded his arms. "And what's that?" Rains turned, his expression cold and unwavering. "They're fighting humans." The Dominion's war machine was grinding to a halt, but not because of a lack of resources or reinforcements. No, the true enemy wasn't starvation, nor was it attrition. It was uncertainty. The enemy no longer knew where to strike. Every time they massed their forces for a decisive push, their supply lines mysteriously collapsed. Every time they attempted to regroup, their fleet commanders wound up dead, their warships sabotaged. They were fighting ghosts. Admiral Rains stood at the helm of the HSS Retribution, watching the endless sea of stars before him. Reports from intelligence were clear. The Dominion was stalling. Their coalition allies were second-guessing their commitment. The Terralis, always opportunists, had pulled back their fleets, unwilling to suffer more casualties. The Vorlun hierarchy, once eager to prove their loyalty to the Dominion, were now losing ships faster than they could replace them. But the Dominion itself, they were still holding on. Barely. Commander Nathan Solus stepped up beside him. "We've bled them, Admiral. They're disorganized, demoralized. One more strike, one decisive blow, and we could end this." Rains exhaled. "And what's your suggestion?" Solus tapped on the holo display. The star map zoomed in on a single point. Primaris 1, the Dominion's true homeworld. Not just a military hub, but the beating heart of their empire. "You want to take the war to their capital?" Rains asked, raising an eyebrow. Solus nodded. "They think we're just hit-and-run raiders. They assume we'll stay in the shadows. But if we strike Primaris 1, if we cripple them where it hurts, they'll have no choice but to surrender." Major Carter chimed in through the comms. He's right. If we destroy their leadership, the Dominion collapses. No one else in the coalition will keep fighting without them. Rains studied the hologram for a long moment. This was it. The final move in the game. The Dominion had declared total war. Now, humanity would finish it. We do it, he said finally. We take the capital and we end this war. The battle for Primaris I began with fire and fury. The HSS Retribution led the charge, emerging from slipstream space with the full force of humanity's combined fleet. The Dominion had fortified the system, deploying dozens of battle groups and planetary defenses. But none of that mattered. The humans didn't fight fair. Electronic warfare teams hijacked enemy communications, feeding them false orders. Dominion fleets turned against each other in the chaos, mistaking allies for enemies. Precision orbital strikes hammered key infrastructure, cutting off power grids, command centers, and planetary shields. And then the ground invasion began. Elite human shock troops deployed across the capital city of Vecta Prime, where the Dominion's ruling war council had barricaded themselves in the Citadel of Lords. The Dominion, once a proud empire of conquerors, now found itself under siege. Nathan Solis led the assault himself, cutting through the last of the Dominion's defenders. He and his strike team breached the War Council's chambers, weapons raised. The Dominion lords, once so arrogant and untouchable, now cowered before them. One of them, a high-ranking warlord, hissed through his fanged maw. This is impossible. We are the Dominion. You are lesser than us." Solis leveled his rifle at the alien's head. "Not anymore." A single shot rang out. Admiral Rains watched from orbit as the Dominion's surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. Their once mighty empire brought to its knees, not by sheer numbers, not by superior firepower, but by ruthless strategy. The war was over. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as a minor player, not as another species to be pushed around, but as a force to be feared. And the galaxy would never forget. The war was over, but peace was not guaranteed. The Dominion's surrender sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Their once mighty fleets drifted aimlessly, leaderless and fractured. Their allies, once so eager to fight humanity, now scrambled to distance themselves from the losing side. Some worlds rejoiced in the fall of their oppressors. Others feared what would come next. Humanity had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. But now, the real question remained. What would they do with their victory? Admiral Rains sat alone in his private quarters aboard the HSS Retribution, staring at the latest reports. Across former Dominion space, revolts had erupted. Entire colonies that had once been enslaved were rising up, purging their former overlords. Some called for independence, others called for revenge, and some called for human rule. A soft chime rang through the cabin. The door slid open, revealing Major Carter. She saluted sharply before stepping inside. "We have a problem, sir," she said. Rains set down his datapad. "Just one?" Carter didn't smile. "More like a dozen. Reports are coming in from the outer Dominion sectors. Some of their military governors refuse to acknowledge the surrender. They've declared themselves warlords, rallying whatever fleets they have left." Rains exhaled. "Of course they have." Carter hesitated. "And there's something else. The coalition is uneasy. The same species that were once willing to fight us now see us as the next galactic superpower. Some are already whispering that humanity is the new threat." Rains leaned back in his chair. He had expected this. No empire simply won a war and walked away without consequences. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity. But fear was a fragile thing. It could turn into respect, or it could turn into hatred. Before he could respond, the intercom crackled. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Terran High Council. Priority 1. Rains glanced at Carter, then nodded. "Patch it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Chancellor Elias Monroe, Earth's highest-ranking political leader. His expression was unreadable. "Admiral Rains," Monroe said, his voice measured. "Congratulations on your victory." Rains inclined his head. "Thank you, sir." Monroe's eyes darkened. "But I'm afraid we have little time to celebrate. The Dominion is broken but not destroyed. Rogue warlords are already rallying their forces, and worse, the galactic community sees us as an unstable power. If we don't act swiftly, we risk another war before this one is even cold." Rains understood. "What's the Council's decision?" Monroe took a deep breath. "We occupy the Dominion's core worlds. We stabilize the region under human governance." Carter's eyes widened slightly. Even Rains felt the weight of those words. "You want us to rule them?" Rains asked carefully. "Temporarily," Monroe clarified. "We don't have to hold their entire empire, just the key systems. If we don't, another power will, and the last thing we need is another galactic warlord rising up to finish what the Dominion started." Rains folded his arms. "And what happens when we do take control? Do we leave? Do we stay? How long before humanity becomes just another empire?" Monroe's face was unreadable. "That depends on what happens next." The transmission cut out. Carter exhaled. "We just won the war, and now we're about to start something bigger." Rains nodded slowly. He knew what came next wouldn't be about battles or fleets. It would be about power, and power had a way of changing everything. The occupation of the Dominion's core worlds began swiftly. Humanity moved with surgical precision, deploying fleets to strategic locations, securing vital infrastructure, and ensuring that no warlord could rise from the ashes of the shattered empire. At first, the remnants of the Dominion fought back. Scattered military units, desperate to reclaim their lost glory, launched ambushes against human patrols. Terrorist cells, fueled by hatred for their new rulers, detonated explosives in key government centers. But none of it was enough. The Terran forces had fought too long, too hard, to be undone by desperate insurgents. For every attack, humanity responded with overwhelming force. For every rebellion, there was swift retaliation. Admiral Rains oversaw the operation from the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as his soldiers secured one Dominion world after another. Commander Solis stepped up beside him. "Most of their resistance is broken," he said. "The few warlords left are fighting each other more than they're fighting us." Rains studied the holodisplay. Dominion space, once a chaotic mess of civil war, was slowly stabilizing, under human control. "And the rest of the galaxy?" Rains asked. Solis hesitated. "They're watching. The Teralis, the Vorlon, the other species who once backed the Dominion. They're nervous. Some think we'll become conquerors. Others think we'll collapse under our own weight." Rains sighed. "And what do you think?" Solis smirked. "I think we just put ourselves at the center of the galactic stage, and everyone's waiting to see what we do next." In the halls of the Dominion's former capital, Vecta Prime, humanity's occupation was beginning to take shape. Major Carter walked through the newly established command center, watching as Terran officials worked to organize the planet's shattered government. Former Dominion administrators, now forced to work under human oversight, muttered bitterly as they compiled planetary reports. Armed soldiers stood watch over them, ensuring compliance. A Dominion governor, a reptilian creature known as High Speaker Keltar Ven, sat before her, his scaled face contorted in barely suppressed rage. "This is not governance," Keltar spat. "This is occupation." Carter leaned forward. "That's because it is an occupation." Keltar let out a low growl. "And how long do you think you can hold it? The galaxy will not allow humanity to seize control of our empire. You may have won the war, but you cannot hold on to victory forever." Carter's expression was cold. "We don't need to hold it forever. Just long enough to make sure the right people are in charge when we leave." Keltar narrowed his eyes. "And who decides who is right?" Carter smiled. "We do." Despite human control over Dominion space, threats still loomed. Deep in the uncharted regions of the galaxy, something watched. A shadowy figure stood aboard a darkened command bridge, its form obscured by swirling mist. Behind it, a group of hooded figures murmured in an alien tongue. "The humans have proven themselves formidable," one voice said. "They have accomplished what none before them could." "They are dangerous," another agreed, "but they are also reckless. Their empire is built on force, not stability." A third voice, older and colder, spoke last. "Then let us ensure they never find stability. Let us remind them that in the darkness of the void there are things far older and far deadlier than them." The hooded figures nodded in unison, and the shadows moved. Back on Vecta Prime, Admiral Rains stood on the balcony of the former Dominion Palace, overlooking the city below. Human banners flew where Dominion emblems once stood. Armed patrols moved through the streets. The once mighty empire of conquerors now lived under human rule. Solus stepped beside him. "So, what now?" Rains didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the stars, knowing that their victory had only led to greater dangers. The war had ended, but the next battle was just beginning. The shadows moved unseen, whispering through the void between the stars. Humanity had conquered the Dominion, but something far older had been watching. And now, it was moving. Admiral Rains sat in his command chamber aboard the HSS Retribution, reviewing intelligence reports. The Dominion's remaining forces were either surrendering or tearing each other apart. The occupation was holding, for now, but the weight of their victory was already pressing down on him. Commander Solus entered the chamber without a word, dropping a datapad onto the table. His expression was grim. Rains picked up the datapad. "What am I looking at?" Solus folded his arms. "A pattern. One we shouldn't be seeing." The report contained star maps marked with strange anomalies. At first glance they looked like nothing, just deep space disturbances, unexplored voids. But the more Rains studied them, the more he saw the truth. "These systems," Rains muttered. "They're dying." Solus nodded. Sensors picked up something strange in multiple Dominion territories. Planets with sudden mass extinctions, orbital stations going completely dark, entire fleets disappearing. No distress calls, no debris, just gone. Rains leaned forward. "Are we dealing with a rogue faction?" Solus hesitated. "We don't think this is Dominion-related, sir. Some of these star systems weren't even occupied, and yet something erased them." A chill ran down Rains's spine. The Dominion had been a brutal empire, but they had been predictable. This question mark. This was something else. "Where was the last incident?" Rains asked. Solus tapped the datapad. A single name appeared. Zelvaris IV, a fringe colony world deep in former Dominion space. "No communications for over a week," Solus said. "It was supposed to be a minor refueling station. Population of 600,000. Our scouts sent a probe." Rains glanced up. "And?" Solus hesitated before swiping on the datapad. The holographic display flickered to life, showing footage from the probe. At first, nothing but static. Then, darkness. The planet below was eerily silent, covered in deep black scars. No lights, no movement. Cities were still intact, yet lifeless. No visible damage, but every building looked wrong, as if something had emptied them. Then the footage cut to black. "That was the last transmission," Solus said. "After that, the probe was gone." Rains set the datapad down slowly. "This isn't a rebellion," he said. "No," Solus agreed. "This is something else." Rains clenched his jaw. He had spent his career fighting enemies he could understand. The Dominion, for all their cruelty, had been alive. But whatever this was, it felt like death itself. The HSS Revenant arrived at Zelvaris 4 within the week. It was one of humanity's best reconnaissance vessels, outfitted with stealth tech and deep space sensors. Major Carter led the team personally, landing in one of the colony's main cities. She stepped out of the dropship, pulse rifle in hand, her boots crunching against the eerily silent streets. The city was untouched, but empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Doors were left open, meals half-eaten on tables. It was as if the entire colony had simply vanished. "Jesus," one of her soldiers muttered. "This is worse than a battlefield." Carter kept moving, scanning the area. Then she stopped. Her HUD flickered. A whisper echoed in her helmet. A strange, static-filled voice. "You are not ready." Then the lights above flickered, and the shadows began to move. Back on the HSS Retribution, alarms blared. "Sir!" an officer shouted. "We just lost contact with the Revenant. One moment they were there, and then nothing." Rains shot up from his seat. "Get me visuals." The screen flickered. At first, nothing but static. Then, an image, a single frame, the ruins of Zelvaris 4, and something standing in the center of the city. Tall, featureless, blacker than space itself. Watching. The transmission cut. Silence fell across the bridge. Then, slowly, Solus exhaled. "Admiral," he said quietly. "What the hell did we just wake up?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. The bridge crew of the HSS Retribution remained frozen, staring at the dark screen where the last image of Zelvaris 4 had played. Admiral Rains felt the weight settle in his gut. He had fought wars, seen entire fleets reduced to wreckage, watched civilizations crumble under orbital bombardments. But this was something else. This was an enemy he couldn't see, and it had just wiped out one of his best teams. Solus exhaled sharply. "Orders, sir?" Rains's mind raced. The smart move, the logical move, was to pull back, report this anomaly to the Terran High Council, and let scientists and analysts break it down. But Major Carter was down there. His soldiers were down there. He wasn't leaving them behind. "Prep a recon team," Rains ordered. "We're going to Zelvaris 4. Solus tensed. "Sir, we don't even know what we're up against." Rains met his gaze. "Then it's time we found out." Hours later, the HSS Revenant 2, a heavily armed infiltration cruiser, descended into the dead skies of Zelvaris 4. The storm clouds above were unnatural, black, twisting, alive. The sensors struggled to penetrate the haze, but Rains didn't need a perfect reading. He could feel it in his bones. Something was wrong here. Aboard the dropship, the retrieval team double-checked their weapons. Experimental plasma rifles, motion trackers, and enough explosives to level a city block. "Remember," Rains said over the comms, "this isn't a rescue mission. We don't know if anyone's left alive." The dropship doors slid open, revealing the ruins of the city below, and the emptiness. Buildings stood intact. Vehicles remained parked along the streets. Streetlights flickered in eerie, rhythmic pulses. But there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a city abandoned in an instant. The team moved forward cautiously. "Eyes up," Solus muttered, scanning the rooftops. "This place feels like a goddamn grave." Rains gritted his teeth. It wasn't a grave. A grave had bodies. This was worse. They found the HSS Revenant near the city center, untouched but eerily silent. The ship's exterior was fine. No battle scars, no forced entry. Yet the crew was missing. Rains stepped inside, rifle raised. The interior was intact, but the air was thick with something unnatural. The lights flickered. Shadows seemed longer than they should have been, and in the command center, a single message had been scrawled across the walls in black, tar-like fluid. They are not dead. They were taken. Rains felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. Then his comm crackled. "Sir," came a shaky voice. "You need to see this." Rains followed the signal to a side alley. A single figure stood in the shadows, helmet cracked, armor scorched. Major Carter. Alive. But when she turned, Rains saw her eyes. They weren't hers anymore, and she started to whisper in a voice that wasn't her own. "They are awake." The air in the alley grew colder as Major Carter's voice rasped through the comms, unnatural and layered, as though something ancient spoke through her. "They are awake." Admiral Rains tightened his grip on his rifle, his instincts screaming at him to fire, to end whatever this was. But this was Carter. One of his best. He couldn't. Not yet. "Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the dread clawing at him. "What's happening? Who's awake?" Her head tilted unnaturally, her blank, hollow eyes locking onto his. "The ones who came before. The ones who wait beyond. You woke them when you tore the Dominion apart." Commander Solis stepped forward, his weapon trained on her. "Admiral, she's not herself. We need to—" Before he could finish, the ground trembled. A low, resonant hum pulsed through the city, vibrating in their bones. The shadows around them stretched and twisted, no longer bound by the laws of light or physics. From the edges of the streets, tall, featureless figures emerged, blacker than the void, their forms shifting like liquid darkness. Rains barked into his comms. "All units, fall back to the dropship, now!" The team didn't hesitate. They opened fire as they retreated, plasma rounds tearing into the figures. The shots seemed to dissipate into nothingness, swallowed by the entity's forms. The hum grew louder, drowning out the sound of gunfire. Carter didn't move. She stood there, whispering as the shadows closed in. Rains grabbed Solis. "We're not leaving her." "Sir, she's gone!" Solis shouted, pulling back. "Look at her!" But Rains didn't listen. He charged forward, slamming into Carter and dragging her toward the dropship. Her body was limp, but her lips kept moving, muttering incomprehensible words. The entities surged after them, faster now. The city itself seemed to warp, buildings bending inward, streets cracking as though reality was unraveling. The dropship engines roared to life as the team piled in. Rains threw Carter inside just as one of the shadow figures reached for him. Solis fired a point-blank plasma burst, and for a split second, the entity recoiled, enough time for the doors to slam shut. "Get us out of here," Rains roared. The dropship shot into the sky, the HSS Revenant II waiting above. Behind them, Zelvaris IV shuddered. The black scars on its surface spread like a disease, consuming the planet. Then, in an instant, it vanished, not destroyed, not shattered, but gone, as if it had never existed. Back aboard the HSS Retribution, the crew worked frantically to stabilize Carter. She was alive, but unresponsive, her vitals erratic. Scientists in hazmat suits scanned her, their faces pale as they whispered about unknown energy signatures and anomalous cellular degradation. Rains stood over her, watching as her lips twitched, still forming silent words. Solis approached, his voice low. "What the hell was that, Admiral? What did we just fight?" Rains didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments, Carter's words, the Dominion's collapse, the sudden emergence of these things. Whatever they weren't just a threat, they were a consequence. "We didn't just win a war," he said finally. "We broke something. Something older than the Dominion, older than us." Solus frowned. "You think this is our fault?" "I think we kicked over a rock," Rains replied, "and something crawled out from underneath." The comms crackled. A transmission from the Terran High Council. "Admiral Rains," Chancellor Monroe's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. "We've lost contact with 3 more systems near Zelveris 4. Reports of shadows. What's happening out there?" Rains exchanged a glance with Solus. Then he straightened, his resolve hardening. "We've got a new enemy, sir," he said, "and it's not one we can fight with railguns." Monroe's silence was heavy. Then, "What do you propose?" Rains looked at Carter, still whispering in her trance. He thought of the Dominion's fall, humanity's rise, and the cost they hadn't seen coming. "We find out what they are," he said. "We figure out how to stop them, and if we can't stop them, we make damn sure they regret waking up." Months later, the galaxy remained on edge. The Dominion was a memory, its worlds now under human stewardship. But the shadows lingered, a quiet menace spreading through uncharted space. Humanity adapted, as it always had. Fleets were refitted with experimental sensors to detect the entities. Scientists raced to understand the unknown energy signatures. Soldiers trained for a war no one could fully comprehend. And in a secure lab aboard the HSS Retribution, Major Carter awoke. Her eyes were her own again, but haunted. She spoke of endless voids, of voices that whispered from beyond time, of beings that had waited eons for a crack in the universe to slip through. "They're coming," she warned, "and they're not afraid of us." Rains stood beside her, his face etched with determination. "Good," he said, "because we're not afraid of them either." The war with the Dominion had ended, but humanity's true fight, for survival, for its place in the cosmos, had just begun. And whatever came next, they would face it as they always had, with fire, with cunning, and with an unyielding will to endure.